Sunday Talks with the Marshmallow Man.
All right, so we're back downstairs, working with the sound. So we're going to continue from last week's Sunday with the Marshmallow Man. I'm the Marshmallow Man, and we're going to do marshmallow work. And we're going to continue with last week's vid where we're starting to explore the idea of a wet-dry rig, an early version of a wet-dry rig, to explain some of the phenomenon that we hear in the live sound as well as in recording, in terms of guitar switching, in terms of the echo volumes, in terms of the strength of phasers and flangers, in terms of how the Univox echo was able to work. All of these things, and then looking at the pedalboard, all these things might be explained by a wet-dry system, where we're using a master head and two amplifiers to bring that signal up in volume for the stage work, which would also allow you to control the stage volume. So what I'm basically going to be talking about in terms of this rig is we're going to have, we spoke about this yesterday, we're going to have a master head, right, which is the marshmallow. Then what I'm going to do is bring it into since it has a line out on it, I'm going to bring it into a buffer splitter. All right, so one of these is going to break off and go to an aux, right, the universal aux, and then into the DAW, the digital audio workstation, GarageBand. The other one is going to break off and go into this pedal board. And then from there, it's going to break off and go into another aux and into the DAW. All right, so it's going to basically accomplish a parallel signal chain between affected and non-affected signals. And what if that's what Eddie was doing? I have a suspicion that it might be. It was sort of where he ended up in life with his live rig, with his recording rig, with wet, dry, wet, wet, dry. This could have been an early version of it. So we're going to start working with that idea and concept and see how it all works out. So for today, why we're down here is we got to build the pedal board. So we are going to use, first we need, obviously this is an Eddie thing, so we need a crappy pedal board. Crappy piece of wood to work on. That'll be accomplished with this, which was, it's basically, I think, a piece of shelving from Home Depot, like black pressboard shelving that they would use, that you would use, you know, like for a kitchen shelf or a storage shelf or something like that. So I just grabbed it because it's easy. It's been used times before, has a lot of holes in it. So we're going to use that. So let's see what pedals we're going to need, because we're going to try to set this up like Eddie's rig. So the first thing we're going to put up, I guess, is the power supply, because we need that just as a point of, you know, necessity. So we have, Eddie had the number 1 box and the number 2 box. Number 1 box, number 2 box. The number 2 box, I believe, was just a backup. That's what I'm working off of theory-wise for this particular trial, that the number 2 box was backup. The number 1 box was a simple loop box to bring in the echo. Then we had the flanger, which was over here on the side. We had a 6-band EQ. We had the number 1 box. We had the phaser, and then it went off stage to 2 echo plexes. So let's start building that. We'll have our flanger. We'll put it over here, right? An MXR flanger. Now I like to put a momentary sort of loop box around the flanger, and I've got this box that was a little load box at one point for one of the other videos, which we're going to repurpose for being a utility splitter and buffer and momentary loop for the flanger to bring that in and out. So what will happen is the marshmallow will enter this box, where the first thing it'll see will be a buffer, a JFET buffer, which will then split it in two directions. One will be an output here, which will go out. This will be the dry signal going straight out to the aux number 2, or aux number 1 rather. And the other output of the buffer will be powering the flanger and the rest of the pedal board. And I find that using a low impedance signal is a good thing, and the buffer will help with the split as well with the loss of signal. So we're going to build that real quick. Then we're going to have the MXR 6-band, right, which was up here, which I think was used as well as maybe a buffer, some tone shaping in things like the eruption sequence. Then we're going to have the box labeled number 1, and I've got this, which I had built prior, which has been many different things, but it's pretty much what I wanted. I just had to do a quick mod to it. Unfortunately, I didn't get it on camera, but what this is an input, and then there's a loop here for going to an echo, and then an output. And the loop is brought in and out via this switch here. So this is basically what I theorized number 1 as being. I also added an indicator light on there, and a LED or an LED ring on this switch so I can know when my echo is in and out. So for the echo, we use the Univox upstairs, and I wanted to, because that Univox echo, the tape is dying on it, and the repeats just aren't as strong. The magnetic material on the cassette tape, I think, is worn to the point now where it just doesn't have enough signal output to really do a good job. So I tried a few different echo units, the Echoplex. I tried a little Memory Man. I tried a Dano. I tried what else did I try? A Flashback. So now we're going to go with this, which is a Catlin bred Echo Rec. It's not exactly the exact model. It's not meant to duplicate that, but it is meant, the Univox, but it is meant to duplicate a tape echo. So that's going to go over here. All right, and we're going to go out and in from the Echo Rec, and this will turn it on and off. Then we're going to have, obviously, the phaser, which will be here, coming out of the output of this box, out of the number 1 box. And then we're going to have our first Echoplex. Might as well use the little Echoplex pedals instead of the big Echoplex. They do a pretty good job. And this is our wet side, so signal degradation is what I was most interested in, is that it seems like the best way to get sounds always is to have a straight down the line, pure, in your face, unmolested, unloaded down signal to be dry, always being your core tone. And then you could fill it out with these effects, and they're not going to degrade your signal. They're only going to enhance it, actually. So if they're a little bit, not punchy, that's fine, because the punch is going to come out of the dry rig. So we're going to use the 2 Echoplexes, because my theory for this is that it wasn't a wet dry, where you would have 2 Echoplexes running into 2 different amps and then a straight down the middle, which would require 3. We may try that, but it is a wet dry, and that these 2 were in series, one being a short slap and the other one being a longer slap, to give you some ambiance and give some feeling of space. So this is sort of what it's going to look like. So we need to build this, and then we're going to wire up the whole thing today. We're going to use, obviously, because we know where we're at, we're going to use the 3 Monkeys pedal stuff, right? The DC 2.1 millimeter, which are these guys here, which it's really simple. It's good stuff. You just screw it on the end of the cable, and you've made a cable. And we're going to be using the 3 Monkeys 1/4-inch audios, which same way, you just kind of screw on. And the other good thing about it is that the 3 Monkeys have this little U channel cut into the end here, so you can actually bend your cables at 90 degrees, like so, and you end up with the lowest profile possible. We could go lower profile, but you can't grab it anymore. This is the lowest practical profile, so it really helps you save. You could get your pedals really close together, and you may be able to add another pedal on a board that, you know, you couldn't before when you were using, you know, larger right angle plugs, whether they be, you know, different manufacturer Switchcraft or not. So they save a lot of space. So we're going to go ahead now, I guess, and build this box. So I'm going to move this off the table here, and we're going to put the box down. Bring out our soldering iron, and we're going to need our drill. So what I envision for this, obviously, I'll do a quick drawing of how this is to work. I think you all pretty much got the general idea of it. You need another sheet of paper. Where is another sheet of paper? All right, we'll have to reuse this piece of paper. All right, so basically what we're going to do with this is we're going to have a jack here, so this will be in, and this will be out, and that will go to the aux, so this is the dry, and then the input, we're going to have a buffer here, so buffer. I should put on my glasses so I can see something. That's much better. All right, so the buffer, we're going to go into the buffer. We're going to have one output, right, going to this dry out. The second one is going to scoot around, and we're going to have a, here we go, we're going to have a send and a return, and then we're going to have an output, and then we're going to have a switch. All right, so the buffer unit is going to go to our switch, and then it's going to go to the send, the return is going to come back, and to the out. So this is a basic double pull, double throw. So the way you would run it, just for, you know, for purposes of demonstration, if these were the contacts, these were the centers, right, the center of the switch, and these were the two momentaries on the outside, you would run your from the input from the buffer, so the buffer would go there, right, and then you would have, in this case, this would go to the send, and then the return would be here, right, and this would be the out. Okay, so you would connect these two, and then the return, the output would go to the center over here, and the return would go like so. So this, in one position, will bypass the loop of the return and send, and in the other position, it will bring it into the chain of the buffered signal. So that's, I think that's pretty straightforward. Should be able to figure that out. So I'm going to have to go ahead and start drilling this box out and laying out all the different parts and putting it together. So that'll take a minute. So let me go ahead and actually build this thing so I don't spend a lot of time sort of making stuff on camera, and we can get into the pedal board more. And at the same time, we're going to be talking about all the questions. So I'll look at a question while I'm working, and we'll have a little discussion about some of the questions that came up from last week's video. So hang on, and I'll be right back. We're back after doing some drilling on the box. So we have, like we were talking about, the input from the amp, the output to a parallel aux, our momentary switch so we can control our flanger, get in, get out, get in, get out, good for Ain't Talking About Love, things like that, where you don't want to do a double step, double tap, just one and out. Our output, and then our send and return for the phase 90. And then we have 2 DC jacks. So I'd like to consider that to be like a complementary jack or an accessory jack. So we're going to power. This unit is going to have a buffer in it, right? So this is our buffer, which is one of Jack Orman's, which are really cool. So I'm always of the opinion, if it's made already, don't make it again. So I like to get Jack's buffers because they're pretty cool. And running them on 18 volts is really good. You get some more headroom out of them, a little more signal. And as coincidence would have it, so does our flanger run on 18 volts. And mine's a vintage unit, but I did modify it to run off of a DC supply input. So what I plan on doing basically is conserving outlets on my power supply. I'm going to run into the unit to power our buffer here and then run out to the flanger. So it's sort of, you know, an all-in-one flanger buddy. So we have, you know, our jack, which is just a momentary double pull, double throw, our 2 jacks on this side, and then our sends and returns, and our 2 DC ports. We'll wire the DC ports in parallel, and we're going to put the board right here. And for that, I'm using some of this 3M automotive stuff, which is really cool. It's like a squishy, thick, rubbery kind of adhesive that I feel works really well for if you want something to stay put, and it's rubber so it insulates. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to attach a few strips inside. Get my scissor out. I'm going to take a piece of this and I'm going to put it here, sort of close to where I want it. I'm going to cut a little bit. Now, actually, we're not going to do it that way. We're just going to put it straight up against there. There we go. Kind of put it down. And we'll take another piece of about the same length. And we'll run it kind of right next to it. Sometimes this stuff can be a real pain in the butt to get the to unpeel this sort of protective strip. So it may take a couple of seconds here. Works better if you have good nails. There, we're getting it. Okay. Got an edge peeled up anyway. Let me grab my needle nose here and see if I can just get that in there. There we go. It's coming up. There we go. Okay. Now we got to get this other one off. Got a little corner up. There we go. And then we could just set the circuit card right in there where we want it. Press it down a little bit. There we go. And that, my friends, ain't going nowhere. I had a opportunity to use this on an automotive project once, and believe me, if it stays on a car, it stays in your pedal. So I'm going to continue and just wire this stuff up as per our diagram that we showed before, and I'll be right back with the finished product. Okay, so we did some basic wiring on the unit here, but I figured I forgot that I should be answering questions from last week's episode while I'm burning my fingers. So that's what I'm going to do. And probably make a bunch of wiring mistakes trying to do too many things at the same time. So we'll start off. We got this first one. Let me clear off a little area here so I can put my laptop somewhere where I can see it. And then I can kind of go through the stuff little by little while I'm working. Okay, so the first question I'm going to address is from Warrior of Genghis Khan. Good to see you again here, Warrior. Question is regarding the first question of 2 different phase speeds. One possible answer is that the tapping section is actually a slow flanger, not the phaser. This gives him the ability to have two separate modulation speeds. I think I might have misspoken in that then, Warrior. I do apologize for that. What I was referring to is two different depths, not speeds, but how deep the phase was. One was a very pronounced deep phase, very noticeable, very strident kind of phase, and the other one was a little bit more subtle. So that was sort of the idea behind, I just dripped a whole pile of solder in my thing here. That's not good. See, I already messed up trying to do too many things at the same time. I don't like messy things, so let me get that piece out. Okay, so I was referring to not the speed or the rate where it was wah, 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 but rather its effect, its mix, how deep, what was the depth of the phase signal. So that's sort of what I was going at there. So I apologize for any confusions regarding the speeds. I didn't concentrate, on two different depths. See, I must have said it then, because I do that all the time. I say things that I don't mean to say because my brain is somewhere else at the same time. All right, Tannery Jordan. I think a flanger in that section would be blatantly obvious. I've never heard the MXR flanger sound anything like the phaser regardless of setting. So many people confuse the two regardless to Eddie, but anyone who's heard either enough should be able to tell them apart. Hell, even people think that Eddie ran the phaser always on pedal. Yeah, I mean, the flanger is significantly different than a phaser. It's pretty apparent when you hear, flangers. And when you hear different brands of flangers, even, I would argue that there are enormous differences. I mean, the MXR flanger has a very peculiar or unique kind of modulation. And the differences between phasers and flangers, obviously, is the amount of notches, how they move in relationship to one another, and then the frequency of those notches. So they are very different. So yeah, the phaser is, for me anyway, difficult to miss or to sort of confuse with the flanger. I suppose to be a way I could be confused, but I don't think that I hear any flanger at all on eruption. I think that's my opinion, so that's okay. No worries there. Differences of opinions are always a welcome thing. I think this thing's done. Yeah, I think it is. Might have to give it a test. All right, so that's Tannery, or rather Tanner. Paulscape72, he was replying to Tanner. The phaser is a subtle effect as baseline modded or not, low voltage or not. Its subtlety varies depending upon what is being played or what is interacting with. When I play Atomic Punk, I leave it on whole song and it's barely noticeable during rhythm. Then comes alive when I do the string scrape. Okay. All I need to do with the rest of the song is engage the flanger here and there for a delay and solo. Most other songs, the phaser is almost exclusively used for solos. Yeah, I think it was used a lot on solos. Tanner's replying, I'm getting in the middle between two people here. So I don't know if my comments are even appropriate, but he said just exactly what I've been thinking. The only reason parts of Eruption has different levels of subtlety is because of what he's playing. During the tremolo picking part, you barely hear it because it's a lot of trouble at once. Once he plays the chords, it's very noticeable because the wider frequencies through. I think it has nothing to do with the phaser mods, wet or dry, whether it's before or after the amp. I have to disagree with that, Tanner. Before or after the amp is very different. It's very different. And to me, now I'm not saying I'm right. Right? I respect everybody's opinion, and we all hear things very differently. Or not necessarily very differently, but differently. In some cases, very differently. I hear a definite difference in not just that particular song, but other places as well. I hear a definite difference. I've always found, I think that's been common among people, to find a phaser that actually sounds like the depth of his, because the MXRs are pretty obnoxious to my ear. It's very difficult to get along with. I mean, the beginning of Atomic Punk is, that's extraordinarily pronounced. So we'll see. Let's see. Tanner's visual volume. It's easy to make a flanger sound like a phaser, not without a soldering iron. They're famous for being able to sound like other effects. That's why people can mix up the sound. I mean, if you're talking, it depends upon the model of a flanger. Now, if you're talking about a flanger that can remove the number of notches and control them in a different way, well, yeah, you could make a unit sound like that, but then it's no longer really a flanger. You're talking about something then that is a switchblade sort of deal where you might be able to add in more and more stages of movable notches until you come up with flange versus phase and different levels of phasing. So maybe it's semantical difference that we're talking about here, visual volume. But a MXR stock flanger and an MXR stock phaser, I don't see how it's possible to make them sound alike. Maybe you could fool someone with it that's not experienced with it, but I don't see how it could be. But again, your mileage may vary. All right, Tanner is replying again. Maybe because they are both modulating filters, correct? But I have never had trouble picking out which was which, and the live footage proved which one he used for what. The way I'd had him set was quite different from one another, and typically have the controls duct tape. True. But they were not taped up in the studio in Neil's photos, and we're talking about a studio sound, not live. I don't believe that there are any photos of Ed recording that album, Van Halen 1, in terms of what was below his waist. We have that one photograph of him, which is taken from the control room through the glass, and he's got his back turned to the console, and we can see he's playing the Explorer, and we can see that there's a 412 slant cabinet with microphones on it. That's all we could see. If you're referring to the studio photo where the band is set up, I believe that's in a different room and it was staged. If you look at his board isn't even the same board as it was before. There's AB boxes on it. Box 1's gone. Someone had sent me some close-ups again. We were talking about it, so it's fresh in my mind. Box 1 was moved. So that may have been rehearsals, in my opinion, for either the second album or after they finished the album, we're going out on tour. It's not uncommon for a band to rehearse in a studio. It's not uncommon. Or to set up for photo shoots and things like that. The things that have been done with Aerosmith in terms of where they rehearse in their studio. And they will do mocked photo shoots with all of the gear that they were going to, even beyond what they would normally use to make it look different. So that does happen. Then visual value from Polscape. Either way, all right. It's kind of getting into a little bit of a disagreement here. Tannery, I feel like if we always assume what he did in the studio is completely wild different than live, this chase would be actually never ending. I don't think it's ever going to end, honestly. We can make theories for an eternity, but I really doubt Eddie or even Don would have been diving as deep as people theorize for a debut album. Assuming Eddie would have had the foresight to set his flanger to sound like a phaser during a solo that wasn't even supposed to make the album. Recorded in 2 weeks is giving him a little too much credit. They have neither phaser nor flange in the live solo, and the tour starts again extremely doubtful. I mean, I think that a lot of times people are of the assumption that coincidence equals conspiracy. I think that happens a lot in life, that our brains are programmed to kind of think that what is occurring is a result of thought. And most of the time it's serendipitous, that there are actions or things that occur that we either ignore or take advantage of. So when, I don't think that, for instance, this is getting out there a little bit, but I think had Jimi Hendrix played a harmonica, there'd be a lot of cats out there with harmonicas right now. I think if Jimi Hendrix had used a different guitar sound and a Les Paul, people would be chasing that. I think it is what we see that we want to replicate. I don't think that Eddie and Don were trying to make the exact sound that we hear on the album. I don't think they were sitting there for months going, we need to make this sound. And then they were able to do it, and that is what we hear on the album. I think it was, we need to make a sound, and it should be somewhat tolerable. We can hear that Eddie's equipment wasn't really pristine compared to modern stuff. It had a lot of artifacts. It wasn't really running right. There was a lot of weirdness to it. but Don was able to kind of tailor it and clean it up and polish it into something that we hear. So, you polish a rock, right? If you've already got something that's polished, you don't need to polish it. And a polished rock looks pretty cool. So I don't think that they were necessarily trying to get at anything. We're just trying to figure out what they did. So I don't think we're ever going to know exactly what happened. And a lot of times people, they panic a little bit before they're going into something like a studio to record a big deal album. And he may have taken his gear and simplified it, or taken it down to another thing that he thought sounded better. He was always chasing something, and his gear changed a lot over the years and over weeks and months. So to assume that what was done the day after was the same that was done before, I don't think it's possible to make that assumption, really. So, yeah, interesting stuff there. Kind of getting into the, the weeds a little bit, but interesting stuff. I think there's a lot more people starting to comment, which is interesting. A lot more people getting on the channel. I hope it doesn't turn into too big of a thing. Not really prepared for that. All right, so Dylan Cannell, you should do a full quest for the Brown Sound Van Halen 1 style video. I feel you're way more detailed than the other videos with the core tone effects, guitar amps. I think you could make a great video. Yeah, thank you very much for the kind words there, Dylan. I think that's what I'm trying to do. It's just that I'm constantly, trying to dial it in and improve it and figure out what was done. I'm not there yet. I'm getting closer all the time, but this is really, all about Van Halen 1. These series that I've done. It's not about 2 or any of the other albums. I think as time goes on, once I'm satisfied myself with where I'm at, I may have to cleanse my palate and move on to something else. But right now we're doing exactly what you're asking for. So hang in there. It's a slow process, but I'm taking you for the whole ridiculous ride that I'm going through on my own here. I'm doing this for myself. I don't think anybody... Maybe some people don't get that. This is sort of like what I've been doing since I was like 13 years old or 12 years old or even earlier. I've always worked with electronics. Even when I was really small, I was working with electronics, making little radios to listen to airplanes, and I just loved working with electronics. But when, I had a cousin that, had an electric guitar, and he played a couple of things on it, and I was like, holy crap, I need that. So since that time, and then hearing one, I've been doing this for, I don't know how old I am, but I've been doing it for over 40 years, that's for sure, all the time. So, I'm doing this for me, and I'm showing you what I'm doing, and maybe it's fun for someone else to kind of come along for the ride, but it's not meant as anything more than that. All right, so we're going on. Paulscape 72 again. Hey. Interesting, box 2 is taped to the board where box 1 used to be in the Zlaz book of VH2s. That's just what we were talking about, right? Maybe box 1 was broken. Could be. After being on tour for the year. Yep, lending credit to your theory that it's a backup. He sometimes had 2 EC80s. I'm not convinced he ran the Echoplexes in series, as he needs a delay for each amp chain, and he always had them within, gotta expand that, close reach, i.e. not in a bomb like an EC80, so he could flip up the repeats knob for certain songs like Down in Flames or Get the Show on the Road. The delay time is always the same for all his early songs, but he has access to change repeats whenever he wants. All of this early setup looks like standard daisy chaining, not slaving or loads to me. I could understand why your point of view, absolutely, in that regard, that it could look like daisy chaining, but I can tell you for a fact, I've worked with some bands, and these are enormous bands, and they have what's inside those amps is pretty friggin' weird. There are inputs going to places you would not expect from the front panel. So when you look at something from the output and assume that what's behind that front panel is the same, it's a big sort of like guess, because it isn't. I can't talk about who they are, but I've been where bands have huge Marshall stacks up on stage. And then one of the 412s is empty. And inside that 412 is a Fender Bandmaster, or rather a Fender Bassman combo. And that's what the main sound is. So it looks like they're playing a whole stack of Marshalls, but they're playing a Bassman combo that's stuffed inside of a Marshall 412 cabinet. You know? So what's going on for pictures? I put zero effort or zero credibility into something until I see it. I mean, I've seen a lot of rigs up close and personal and worked on them and had my friends who work on them. And then you see like something like a Premier Guitar rig rundown, and they do a very good job, but it isn't always accurate. A lot of times there'll be, you know, let's say favors or endorsements or trickery involved in that. And I can say with confidence that a few bands have pulled the wool over their eyes. So unless I see it and see it used and know that that's what's going on and have worked it, I leave all things open. That doesn't mean I discount what they're saying either. I don't assume that someone is not telling the truth. I assume that any of these possibilities, any of the permutations are there. It could be partial truth, total truth, half truth. So that's always served me well in life, is to not assume anything is what you think it is until you know it is. And you can approach things that way. I mean, you can work with something that you don't know what exactly it is until you do, and still be able to work with something that way. But I think it's important to sort of, you know, go through the whole ideas of what do we know for certain. I mean, I'm at the point that Eddie Van Halen, the only thing we know is Eddie Van Halen is a human being that played a 6-string guitar sometimes. Other than that, I can't say. All right, so let's keep going with what Paul was talking about. Each amp. So the daisy chaining, it could be daisy chaining, right? Or it could be, how are those inputs set up? Those jacks. Where did the jacks go to? Where were they coming from? So I don't hear daisy chaining, but I could be wrong. I often am, and we need to know. So that's an interesting food for thought there, Paul. Thank you for that. Good to see you too. And we've got another one for Tanner. Yeah, my double of a pedal module was either a backup for the fact that he was running 2 rigs at once. Each rig needed an EQ for an Echoplex, hence the 2 of them. And honestly, I think the 2 Univoxes are just backups for being tape delays or just unreliable. The Univox was only in 1 rig chain. I think box 2 was a backup for box 1, which didn't need to be used until at least the end of the tour, if not after the Van Halen tour sessions. He really kicked that box hard when you engaged the Univox. Yeah, I think these are very valid points here, which you're sort of expanding on Paul's idea or Paul's statements there. I definitely think box 2 was a backup, just in case something broke on the board, because those stomp switches, they're notorious for going down. And yes, certain artists, I know a few of them, that they think the harder you smash on them, the better the pedal sounds. So they will full out kick that sumbitch, trying to make it sound better, and all it does is break things. Other guys, they just want to break shit. They just do. They don't care. They just want to break something, and then, you know, look at you and say, why did you let that break for me? Anyway, Dylan's back again. Hey Dylan, you have nailed Eddie's tone. I don't know. I'm getting happy with what I'm getting. I don't know if I've nailed it, because I ain't Eddie, number one. I suck. So that's going to be hard to get there entirely. All right, Buzzed Aldrich. What's up, Buzzed? Ossie, your Tom Carvel impersonation was spot on. I think you've been trying to figure out if he used the Univox or an Echoplex on the Cookie Push commercial. I think that Tom Carvel was attached to a Variac. That's what I think. I think Tom Carvel was running low voltage. Maybe that could be a subject for another episode. Thank you as always. You're welcome. Tom Carvel was definitely running on 80 volts and was biased hot. And that's why he sounded like Tom Carvel. Wednesday is Sunday. All right. Dylan's back again. Hey, Dylan. Ossie, can you do a deep dive on the tone on songs played with the Destroyer and Van Halen 1? I know you make a great video about it. Well, I'll try. I still got to get my rig together more. I'm still working on that, and I'm not much of a guitar player, so I maybe leave that to somebody else. to do that sort of a thing. I guess I can figure out which songs were the Destroyer and which were not. And that's kind of important because when you have a Gibson scale with those lightweight strings on it, you get a little bit more flappage than you would on the Strat. Okay. All right, so now we've got Warrior again. This one's got a few replies to it, so we'll have to go through this. Let me see how long we're going. All right, so this is what I think is going on with the switching. It says Warrior of Genghis Khan. Guitar, flanger, EQ, box 1, out of 1 and 2. Out 1 and 2. Yep, top and middle. Go to the Univox Echoplex remote switches, controller on off. Out to backline, out 3. Phaser possible. An Echoplex preamp. Out to backline through an Echoplex preamp back to backline. I'm not sure if I'm figuring out what you're thinking of there. You have the Univox top 1 and middle 2 go to the Uvoxes. I think that's right. Echoplex remote switches, controller on off. Yeah, there are 2 circular sort of stomp switches that are off the board a little bit. Those are definitely for the Echoplex, I think, or I think they are. I shouldn't say definitely. Out 3 is phaser. Now the out 3 I think is just the the loop out, because there's 4. That box number 1 has 4 jacks in it, and to me 4 jacks says you got a loop pedal. All right, input, send, return, output into phaser. It's the only thing that makes sense to me, but someone else might make sense of it a different way. All right, so if the bottom of out 3 of box 1 is not affected by the button on the box, that signal is essentially a dry and goes through the phaser. Correct. The button on box 1 either toggles between out 1 and out 2. Remember, out 3 is always live. Yep. Or the button brings in both 1 and 2 and are always on 3. I think it's just a loop box. I think that's the simplest explanation for it. This routing gives you the ability to have a delay. Yes, have 2 delays. Change between 2 delay speeds, instantly cut the delay, and have the delay tail off like eruption. That would require more stomp switches than 1 switch. 1 switch would only give you 2 variables, 2 permutations, and you have too many permutations there if I'm reading this correctly. You would need multiple switches. I mean, we'll go into that because the tail off thing is something that I thought was interesting, and I've got on this little board, that's this little box here I'm using as box 1, right? So we have, just like in his, it's the same sort of thing. 4, 1, 2, 3, in. So in from the phaser, send out to the Univox input, return from the Univox output, and this is the output that goes to the phaser. Hit a button, this loop is engaged. Hit the button again, this loop is no longer engaged. In this feature, you have a delay. In this feature, you don't. In either case, you have a straight through, right, which would go to the phaser. If you wanted to have the box tail, wanted to have the echo tail off while you're still playing, you would need a secondary switch, which I might put in this hole right here, which would basically keep the return of the echo unit going while muting the input or changing the input to here. So you would have what would basically be like a very primitive rudimentary loop pedal, and that's possible. I'm going to do it both ways because I think sometimes I almost feel like that loop is going on, or that the end of eruption is still going while he's playing the chords for You Really Got Me. So I don't know, could be. Okay, Warrior saying, Ed, before anyone mentions the Oakland shots, please note that the pedalboard routing was messed with mid-set. The Japan photo shows the leads in that position because it's how they fell when they were unplugged to stop the batteries and pedals from dying. Yeah, again, when someone goes out on tour, all bets are off. To say something a month later is what happened a month earlier, it's possible, but it's not a definitive. So what goes on at Oakland or what went on later, they could give you clues as to how he thinks or what these pedals are capable of doing. Like, is that a switch box? Is it a loop box? Well, if you see him using it in different ways, all of which would line up with the way a loop box is working, then you can lend more credence to the idea that it's a loop box. Edit. Trying to get every permutation that we're hearing from the studio live. I don't think it's possible with the gear as is, but if you add box 2, it might be. All right, see, I didn't read that. Yeah, I mean, you hit it right on the head. There are too many permutations for a single switch, which is, binary, on, off. There's 2. So for that many permutations, you would need more switches, or you would need, electronic switching, things like that. More like logic, right? You would need a logic sort of setup, or just more switches. Follow the root in Ossie's diagram, you have the Univox and phaser. Generate noise and not be affected while the guitar is playing, you really got me. The signal needs to be separated before box 1. Now if box 2 is an AB switch to toggle between the 2 power lines, you could place it at the start of the chain. Now if both guitars plugged in, Frankie goes through the full pedal board, and B, the shark bypass it all and goes through another route into another amp. That means box 2 is not a backup for box 1. Box 1 is a loop switch, in and out, and we'll send a return. Box 2 is the AB box with 2 ins and outs. I think the AB box was done backstage. I do. And that's what most of the switching of guitars is done by the roadies. Always. There's very, very rarely are you going to have a guitar player doing his own guitar switches. If they have any kind of ability to have a crew, which Van Halen obviously did with Rudy. It allows for, if you break a string, you could do a quick guitar change. I mean, I've seen guys change guitars with practically not even missing a note. It's like a little dance between the tech and the guitar player, kind of like grabbing the guitar, playing it while there's roadies still holding it while he pulls the other guitar off him. It's crazy. But you definitely won't. I think all guitar changes are done backstage. I would say with Eddie's too. And for that, you would use something like this, which was, I brought this out because I don't know how I knew this was going to come up. I just figured it might. So with, these have been around forever. So this you would just have in the back, this would be the Strat, this would be the Destroyer, something simple like that. So, being that all that stuff is backstage as well, leads me to believe, it really does, that there was a master head back there. The master head could have been on the back line as well, but I think all of the gear behind the back line was, for switching and for loading and for distribution. Just makes sense to me that that's how it would have been done, because that's how he was doing it later on in life. Okay, let's see. All right, man, we've got a bunch more. So maybe I'll have to just keep answering these questions, and I got to move this stuff out of the way anyway. Let me just test this thing to make sure that it's passing some signal. So I got my little amp on the floor here. It's the little whatchamacallit. It's the little Supro amp, little 50s Supro amp that I like to keep on the floor here. It's got the little oval speaker on it, just a volume knob, so it's easy. So I got a little power supply I'm going to plug in here. I'm going to turn this thing on, plug it in. All right, we've got our plug from our... Okay, I'll grab a guitar. And then we're going to test it out. See what it does. I hope this video isn't getting super long. I have a feeling it is. Alright, so this would be the input. And this would also be an output too. Here. Cool. All right, I think we got something. I need to grab a cable. A little cable just to test the loop function. So I'm just going to go through it this way just to test it. Okay, that seems to be fine. Unplug it. Something's going on with that. Must have been talking. Oh, duh. We're in the wet. or into the dry. We got to go back into the wet. We have to label everything too. Yep. Now I'll put the world's worst flanger in the loop. Okay, that works. Alright, so we're good to go with this little guy. Don't worry about this little guy right here. And you boys want to go to Mexico? Alright, let's continue. Alright, I gotta put the board up here, and we're gonna answer some more questions, but I'm gonna put the gotta close this thing. Alright, let me read another question real quick. Can't wait till next Sunday from Topa 1798. Ah, that's great. I hope people enjoy it. You know, I'm just doing this, like I said, doing what makes me happy, what I'd be doing today anyway. If I, you know, it's a Sunday, weather stinks. So, in the winter times, aside from going to the gym, this is what I love to do, is just come up with ideas and test them out. And take them apart. So yeah, so this is next Sunday. So I hope you like this video. Let me grab the board again. So, here it is. Get the soldering iron out of the way. Make some room. Put the board in. So we're gonna lay everything out again. And this guy goes here. This little guy. So now comes the time to start, I guess, putting it all together and wiring it up. So, let me get my wire out of the way here. And I'm going to count up what I need. So, like if you want to buy cables to build your pedal board, you want to buy them from us. They're the easiest things on the planet to make with, right? And it's 3 monkey solderless. So we're going to start doing some of the wiring now. But if you want to order stuff, we custom. I mean, if you order cables from us, I'm actually the one that's putting your kit together. So remember, I'm dyslexic. So if I mess up your order, I really apologize. But probably I didn't even know that I messed up your order. But you can order whatever combination of stuff you want to build out your board. So I'm going to count out how many pieces I need. So for 1/4 inch, I need, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So I need 18 of the 1/4 inch plugs. You can see when you put them in, if we get, let me get another one here. You put it in here, right? You can see how close you could get these to each other. Right? Like this is literally, you can put your connectors that close together and the cables can come out to you. So between your two pedals, you have 1 inch. That saves some real estate for you. So, yeah. And the other thing we're going to do is I like to screw my stuff down. I don't like to use the Velcro. It's too sticky and I don't know. So I like this. So I got these little solder tabs, these little tags that you can get, and I just remove one of the screws off the back cover and put them in. And then I take a little, a little wood screw, number 4, like machine screw, not machine screw, but sheet metal screw. Drill a little hole and then screw the pedals down into there, and then they don't go anywhere. So I'm going to have to add like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I need like 8 of those. But luckily I saved the ones I pulled off these pedals before. So here they are in this little thing. And then I'm going to use these guys to kind of run the cables through to neaten it all up and tie it all down so it stays nice and secure and doesn't flop around when you go out on tour, because I'm not going out on tour. Oh! We got to do this. We got to do this right now. probably is not exactly correct. Here, we'll just put, I mean, this is like an Eddie board, so. I am such an artist. Box 1. Yeah. All right. Box 1. And this is my own sort of deal. But anyway, that's fine. All right, so let's go answer another question. Keep going. So Topo was 19. Yeah, thanks can't wait till next Sunday. Next one. These go to 1968. Why are you using child's drawings of VVH's 1978 live pedalboard when there are actual photos of it? I don't know. Why am I wearing giant fuzzy bare feet? I have no idea. These two questions have the same answer. Moving on. Warriors back. Thanks, these go to 11. Hey, Ossie, I just thought about box 1. If it does split the signal 3 ways, then there will be a frequency and signal loss, as it appears to be passive. But this might explain why the EQs are there and why there are so many in the photos. Well, the EQ could definitely be used for driving something, right? But this is sort of like the dumbest thing I could think of to use as a line driver. I think that there was a dual use to it. Line drivers were available. JFETs were available. There were ways of doing it without having to use an EQ. So I think the EQ was part of the sound for this particular deal. I think he was trying to sculpt the sound that was going out to those to the EC80 and particularly for eruption for some reason. These are great questions, the answers of which would be instrumental to figuring out what he was doing. The other thing I want to say is, you got to kind of use your head to think of, like, what can you assume about what's going on and who may have been doing what. So we know, like, Ed, we saw his guitar, right? He couldn't wire up a switch. He could not wire this switch up. I don't think so. Based upon the way that he, put together a Stratocaster, I think like a loop box was something a little bit out of his purview. So somebody made this stuff for him. I believe that. And it probably was Jose. I don't know. Maybe it was Rudy. I haven't met Rudy, so I don't know what his technical capabilities are. But generally speaking, I've always, been told and have witnessed, there are exceptions to this. But most of the time, that these, the guys out there on the road, the guitar techs are, they're field medics, not surgeons, so to speak. So their skill set revolves around maintaining these things, making sure that everything's working, staying calm under pressure, being able to, most importantly, handle the emotional swings of your nutjob artist. You have to have a bedside manner. You have to be the coolest cat in the entire arena if you're a guitar tech. You have to be. Because your guitar player is going to melt down from time to time. And if you melt down, that ain't going to be good. You're going to be gone. You need to be the coolest cat in the whole cat house. So my guess is that Rudy probably didn't build this stuff for him. So that leaves Jose, I think. So if Jose was building this stuff, Jose was, I don't know what his, pedigree is. I know he worked for Vox. I know he supposedly designed the Super Beetle being solid state. He designed, some things of that nature. So working with transistors and ICs and things like that, and understanding, impedance differences or impedance issues, and being able to understand signal levels. Those are all things that Jose would be in his wheelhouse. So what was what was going on in his rig probably was more advanced than we sometimes led on to believe. Now, in terms of what you're talking about, the signal being weakened, if it were that the signal was in this, let me get out my kids' drawer. Hold on, gotta get my, wait, I gotta draw. Gotta draw a little teddy on there to complete the look. If there was a master head that was being loaded down, that would no longer be an issue. You would have the output of a Marshall 100-watt head to drive whatever you wanted to. So you could step it down to whatever voltage you're looking for at whatever impedance you want it to be presented to the next unit. So you could make the impedance compatible with pedals. You could make them compatible, but generally speaking, you would want similar impedance to what a guitar has. So a lot of these instruments, right, they're meant to go for guitars. So they're looking to be connected to, in some cases, not all cases, but in some cases, they're looking to be connected to something that's very low. Not as low as when we talk about pickups, you're like, I use low impedance pickups. I'm like, oh my God. What do you, yeah, I guess, but, you know, I don't know. How low is low, I guess, is what we're getting at here. All right, so for me, at 9K is fairly low. Right, so that would be the load presented to the unit. So if you were to drop down, you know, something, a Stratocaster 4K, if you were to drop it down with a, you know, step-down transformer, and then you would, you know, match it up with a load, or rather give it a ground reference somewhere around that, you could mate up with these units really well. You could also feed them from multiple places where you have literally an ocean of signal that you can put out into tiny little hoses, and as many as you want. From a 100-watt head, you're not going to have any problem, you know, running multiple parallel systems that are small signal sort of units like guitar pedals and front ends of amplifiers. So yeah, but you're on the right track, Warrior. I mean, that's a great observation. Yes, a buffer would have been needed of some sort, and in my case, I'm saying that the head provided that. We got the last question, and then we can kind of go back into working on this thing maybe. Listen to the raw, this is from Montour R. Listen to the raw guitar track from this song, and you playing is almost identical. Both amps have the same tone quality in the mids. What was that from? Oh, will it do fair warning? Oh, so this is not from last week's question. This was using the Marshmallow amp to do fair warning. It does a pretty good job, but since hearing some of the other things, I think it's still the same amp, but I think maybe they might have started messing around a little bit with cascading gain stages by then. I don't know. What if? What if by that time they were getting close to being more like the Jose mods? Not maybe all the way, but, you know, doing the one-wire mod or some version of a cascaded gain stage with the first two triodes of V1. That's kind of what I'm sort of hearing on some of the stuff, but it could still be the slave rig again. So, all right, those are our questions, and those are some really good questions. We got some really kind of thoughtful peeps running around in the chat down there, so that's much appreciated. Let's see, where are we at? I think we've been going on way too long. You know what? I'm going to stop here, and I think wire this board up in the next video. So I'm gonna cut here and piece this off, and then I'm gonna shoot another video with this, and maybe that'll be Tom Carvel Wednesday is Sunday. So once again, thanks for watching, and thank you for the comments. Keep them coming, and we continue the quest shortly. So I'll see you later.